Is the first-person shooter dying? Or is it just evolving? Since the days of Wolfenstein, Doom, and GoldenEye, we've been totally obsessed.
I am obsessed
with this idea of taking a virtual gun and aiming it at the meaty body parts of a virtual opponent. The genre has been one of the biggest moneymakers in all of games, but lately it seems like the FPS is kind of running low on ammo.
I'm out of ammo. That's bad. This is bad.
The elephant in the room is Titanfall, the enormous mech shooter designed by the same people who created Call of Duty. So clearly they know what they're doing. The hype for the game, as expected, has been extraordinary, but the sales figures maybe not so much. To be fair, it was initially released for the Xbox One, which was just released last fall and hasn't reached full market maturity yet. But EA, the publisher, hasn't released sales figures for the game, leading some like Forbes to speculate that maybe the sales aren't quite so good. I mean, if the game was selling extraordinarily well, trust me, you'd hear about it by now. Unofficially, VG Charts tallies global sales somewhere in the 2 million unit range. I mean, this sounds like a lot, but by comparison, Call of Duty Ghosts last year sold $1 billion in retailers in just the first month, a stat that Activision was more than happy to trot out. But even Ghosts ultimately sold 10 million fewer copies than its predecessor Black Ops 2. Halo 4 sold really well initially, but saw its player base decline, losing 360,000 players in its first couple months. Look, there's no FPS sales chart, and yes, millions of people still play Call of Duty and Halo. That's undisputed. But there's no denying that these downward trends signify some kind of decrease in popularity for the shooter on a glacial scale. So what's going on here? This isn't unprecedented. In fact, we've seen another shooter genre fizzle in times past. If you went back to the year 1950, way before I was born, and you went to any average American theater, you'd find a common theme: the Western.
Unloosen that belt.
I don't think you understand how popular the Western genre was, so let me drop some stats on you. During the 1950s, over 420 Western films were released. That's like one Western every week for an entire decade. In 1959, there were 5 TV channels, but there were 26 Western-themed primetime TV shows. That's like 7 to midnight, 5 days a week of just guns and horses. Westerns ruled the screen for almost 2 decades, but by the late 1960s, they started to decline for a variety of reasons.
No rich lady with any class at all buys that cowboy crap anymore.
As it turns out, some of the things that doomed the Western also plagued the first-person shooter. For one, people underwent some serious genre fatigue.
I'm tired.
Just as audiences eventually got tired of seeing one Western after another, we've been playing first-person shooters for over 20 years. We're starting to see articles like this one on Kotaku. Are we all getting a little tired of shooting things in the face? And I think maybe we are.
I hate first-person shooters.
I hate first-person shooters.
Look, I enjoyed the Advanced Warfare trailer as much as the next guy, but can you really argue that there's anything that novel or interesting going on? Something that you haven't seen anywhere else? Mech suits, invisibility cloaks, drones. Well, yeah, there's Kevin Spacey, but he's basically reprising his role as Senator Frank Underwood from House of Cards.
And the butchery begins.
And that's just in terms of the fictional environment. I mean, if you're really honest with yourself, do you really think that the next Call of Duty is going to be some huge departure from what you've done in previous Call of Duties? Part of the problem is the shooter, much like the Western, has become homologous. The form has more or less been perfected. Everybody uses the same button layout and moveset.
Every Call of Duty is the same.
I know it's silly to sound like turn of the 19th century US Patent Commissioner Charles Holland Duell when he said that everything that will be invented has been invented, which is ridiculous. He said this a couple years before the Wright brothers took their famous flight. But with shooters, it does often feel like that. Doom was revolutionary for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was a rudimentary form of aiming. Gears of War changed the way that we think about taking cover in a shooter. I don't think we're seeing the same kind of radical changes like we used to, at least in ways that are being communicated to us as players. At this point, vertical aiming is as ubiquitous as the Stetson hat. Taking cover is as common as playing poker at the saloon. It's all been done before. I mean, where do you go after a 256-person shooter like MAG? 512 people? 1,000? A million? Shooters are stuck in this vicious cycle where they have to continually outdo themselves year after year to attract more people, which then only drives up the cost, which then only furthers the need the following year for an even bigger spectacle to attract even more people.
I'm tired, boss.
You get the idea. As a result, shooters are often unadventurous and for good reason. Play it safe and you might get to compete with the big boys like Call of Duty or Halo. Stray from the path though, and you might be forced out of business. BioShock Infinite, for example, sold more than 4 million copies, but its maker, Irrational Games, recently closed its doors due to lower than expected sales and the unrealistic expectations of big budget game production. Well, that's the cynical side of it, but maybe there's an alternate explanation. Maybe the first person shooter isn't dying, it's just evolving. The good news is that we're starting to see cross-pollination between the shooter and other types of games. Turtle Rock's Evolve lets one person play as a giant mutant boss. Then there's Soldier Front 2 Hero Mode, which is a mix between an FPS and a MOBA. And then there's Harmonix, the folks who made Rock Band. They have a new game called Chroma, which is a mix of a rhythm game plus an FPS. Destiny is a shooter MMO. Lictum is a shooter where you play as a wizard firing fireballs, which sounds amazing. And then there's all the wild experiments that come out of the 7-day FPS game jam, like Superhot, which, as the name suggests, is super hot. But these are just cross-genre explorations. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper, there's a more significant evolutionary pattern at work here. Look at a game like Portal, for example, where the thing that you shoot is, well, portals, but they help you solve metaphysical puzzles. Is that a shooter too? As MoMA curator Paolo Antonelli has said, guns in a game context don't have to be just about shooting bullets or killing people, the way they might be with a physical object of a gun. In games, guns can be a metaphor for a designed interaction. Eventually that leads you to a very, very big question, and I'm being totally serious when I ask this. What does it mean to shoot anyway? Games like Gone Home and Antichamber rely on the conventions and mechanics of a first-person shooter. You still have a reticle on screen that helps you aim, you're still in first person, and you use WASD or dual thumbsticks to help you move around and look about the world, just like in an FPS. And you're still beaming packets of information from point A to point B. The core mechanic for the FPS, and this is a little bit abstract, is that you look at something and then you interact with it. And then you look at something else and then you interact with that too. In Gone Home, you've just replaced bullets with a box of tissues, or a Bratmobile cassette. Okay, so that probably falls outside of your traditional definition of what counts as a first-person shooter. But remember, Gone Home relies on your literacy, your understanding of the language of shooters in order to exist. It presumes that you grew up on games like Doom and GoldenEye and Team Fortress 2. Maybe first-person shooters are evolving into this amazing new class of first-person games, which is great because it means you have more options than just a headshot. A game like Mirror Moon means that you can use a gun to control a distant planet, or a game like Super Ball, which is a variant on soccer and gives you this incredible precision of play. And then there's Unfinished Swan, which apparently I'm the only person who played this, in which you're able to shoot globs of paint to expose this magical dream world, voiced by Terry Gilliam no less. I'm not sure what's going on with Vision X, but the design team says that technically it's an FPS. That's really important. They could have called it all different types of things, a puzzle game, etc., but the fact they wanted to keep it within the FPS framework means that they're looking at the genre in a much more expansive way. The shooter is becoming just like the novel, which started in medieval times with just romance, but now has blossomed to encompass all different types of stories. I'm not saying that big fun shooters like Battlefield are going to completely disappear. I mean, look at the words of Doom creator and father of the modern FPS, John Carmack. He said, "I believe the first-person shooter is going to be around forever." And we agree. It's like how the Western disappeared into the sunset but was too legendary to be gone for good. We have contemporary Westerns like No Country for Old Men, acid Westerns like El Topo, sci-fi Westerns like Westworld. Kill Bill was a Western something. More importantly, the themes of the Western went on to influence all types of films, like Star Wars, or Die Hard. But if we let go of what the FPS is now, then we can embrace the bright future of what it will become someday, even if that future involves shooting a box of tissues at a lamp.
Let me put that back up there. There we go. Stay! Stay!
So what do you think? Is the FPS dying, or is it undergoing some strange Pokemon-style transformation? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week, we talked about whether or not games can give you spiritual experiences. Let's see what you had to say. Many of you, like Midnight Journey, were deeply touched and moved by the game Journey. That would certainly qualify as a game that seems to create a lot of spiritual experiences, and you wanted to know whether or not that experience could be replicated elsewhere. You know, it's really interesting. If you look at the words of Genova Chen, the designer of the game, he actually uses some of the techniques that we mentioned in our very first episode, looking at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's hero's journey, and he and his team at that game company designed the game explicitly to try and create the sorts of experiences that you're describing. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a cynical view on it, that this is something that can be replicated elsewhere, but there is a process there that makes you feel a particular way. Matthew Davis argues that the term spiritual for him is not a useful term. And I don't actually know that we disagree. So you're saying that spiritual is a feeling that's mystical or intangible. I think that would absolutely fit in with the same kind of feelings of transcendence. I mean, we deliberately tried to find a definition or work with a definition that would allow for a lot of different types of interpretations. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? That if a spiritual experience, there was one way to think about it, then we would all just think about it the same way. But I do think that you and I were describing the same types of experiences, so we're not that far off. 3X Gaming is willing to believe that all games can create spiritual experiences, all games save one, Grand Theft Auto Online. I know you're joking. I mean, you know, maybe you have some personal vendetta against Rockstar for how they rolled out GTA Online that wasn't available to you or something like that, but I actually think that GTA Online is exactly the type of game that can create these kinds of transcendent experiences, in large part because there are other people there. It has all these emergent qualities and that you can kind of do whatever you want in the order that you want to do, but there's also, I mean, there is this sense of kind of profound beauty in GTA Online. I mean, there's a hiking club that tries to climb up Mount Chiliad, you can watch a sunset, you can go, you know, parachuting. I mean, there's all different things that you can do to sort of experience that world. I actually think it's a good test case. So thanks for the joke, but I actually think that's actually a great game to find spiritual experiences. To me, I'm older. I'm glad that games helped you figure out that you were transgender. I mean, games can be a great proxy, like any great art form, for vocalizing the sorts of things that are inside of us that we're not either ready or able to say in public. So that's an amazing place that games are able to help you think through this and kind of become the person that you know that you wanted to be. War Therapy shared a really powerful story. This person used to play with their father. They used to play video games with his father, and they owned an Xbox together. They had this one game, Rally Sports Challenge, that they would play. I guess his father was much better, and the father passes away, and years later, War Therapy comes back, sits down, plays the Xbox, and there's the ghost, not the literal ghost of his father, but the ghost inside the racing game that he tried to defeat again and again. He couldn't. He finally gets to a place where he can, and he stops just short of the finish line to sort of like let this memory, this digital sort of version of his father's past playthrough kind of live on. Yeah, that's a really powerful and profound experience. Thank you for sharing that.